The final words. The bunker was cold and dark, hidden deep beneath the forest. The only light came from the small, flickering screen on the wall. Cale sat beside his mother, Soraya, his hand shaking as he held hers. Her skin, once smooth and silver blue, was now pale and weak. Her breathing was slow, her chest rising and falling with great effort. "Mother, please don't go," Cale whispered. His voice broke. Soraya gave him a weak smile. "My son, you must listen." Her voice was soft, but there was urgency in it. "They will come for you. And when they do, you must be ready." Cale shook his head. He didn't want to hear this. He wanted to believe she would be fine. But deep inside, he knew the truth. She was dying, and he was alone. "Who will come?" he asked, his throat tight. Soraya coughed, her body trembling with pain. "The ones who chased us, the ones who destroyed our home. They never stopped hunting us, Cale." Cale swallowed hard. He had always known they were hiding, always moving, never staying in one place for too long. His mother had taught him how to blend in with humans, how to speak like them, act like them. But she had never told him why. Now, the truth was spilling out in her final moments. "They wanted something from us," she continued, "something inside us. And now, you are the last." Cale's hands clenched into fists. "I won't let them take me," he said, his voice filled with determination. Soraya smiled again, but this time it was sad. "You are strong, my son, stronger than you know. But strength alone will not save you." She reached into the pocket of her torn black coat and pulled out a small metallic cube. It was no larger than a human's palm, but it pulsed with a soft blue light. Cale had never seen it before. This is your legacy," she whispered. "Take it. Keep it safe." Cale hesitated before taking the cube. The moment his fingers touched it, a strange warmth spread through his hand. For a second, he thought he heard whispers, voices he could not understand. He looked at his mother, fear in his eyes. "What is this?" he asked. "The key," she said simply, "to everything." Cale didn't understand. He wanted to ask more, but Soraya's breath was coming faster now. Her body was trembling, her strength fading. Tears burned in his eyes. "Mother, no. Please, stay with me." She lifted a shaking hand and touched his cheek. "You must survive, Cale. You are the last of our kind." A loud beep suddenly echoed through the bunker. Cale turned, his heart pounding. The security alarm. The one that only went off when someone had found them. He turned back to his mother in panic, but her eyes had closed. Her breathing had stopped. "No," Cale whispered. He shook her gently. "Mother." She didn't move. The alarm kept beeping, louder now. Cale's hands trembled as he placed the cube in his pocket and stood up. He wiped his tears. He could not break down now. His mother had warned him. "They will come for you." A metallic voice spoke through the bunker's speakers. "Warning. Unauthorized presence detected. Warning." Cale took a deep breath. Footsteps echoed above him. Heavy, slow, searching. He wasn't alone. They had come. His mother's final words echoed in his mind. "You must survive." With one last look at her still body, Cale turned and ran. The hunters arrive. The bunker was no longer safe. Cale's breath came fast as he pressed himself against the cold concrete wall, his heart pounding in his chest. Above him, the heavy thud of boots echoed through the underground structure. The intruders were moving carefully, sweeping the rooms, searching. He clenched his fists. His mother's body was still behind him, her face peaceful in death. He wanted to stay to mourn, but there was no time. The moment the security alarm had gone off, his fate was sealed. "They will come for you, and for what you carry inside." Soraya's last words burned in his mind. He reached into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the cool surface of the small metallic cube she had given him. It pulsed softly, as if alive, as if aware of the danger. Then, a metallic clang. A door forced open. Cale tensed. The intruders had found the main corridor. They were close now. He peeked around the corner. Shadows stretched across the dimly lit hallway. 5 figures entered, their weapons raised, their black armor reflecting the faint glow of the bunker's emergency lights. Not human soldiers. Mercenaries. Cale had seen their kind before. Cold, efficient, killers for hire who served the highest bidder. They weren't here to arrest him. They were here to take him. Or worse. He took a slow breath, forcing his panic down. His mother had trained him for this. She had always known this day would come. Hide. Observe. Plan. Escape. The leader of the group, a tall man with a deep scar across his cheek, stopped and lifted a small device to his mouth. "He's here," the man said, his voice calm, almost amused. "Life signs detected. The hybrid is still breathing." Cale's pulse spiked. "Orders?" another mercenary asked. A crackling voice came through the leader's earpiece. Cale couldn't hear the words, but he saw the smirk on the man's face as he replied. "Alive if possible. Dead if necessary." Cale's fingers tightened around the cube. They weren't taking him alive. He turned and ran. The chase begins. The sound of his footsteps echoed down the bunker's narrow hallways. Behind him, a sharp voice barked. "Move." He's running. Gunfire erupted. Blue energy bolts struck the walls, leaving black scorch marks. Cale ducked, his instincts taking over. He twisted around a corner just as a blast narrowly missed his head. His mind raced. He knew this bunker better than anyone. It had been his home for as long as he could remember. He had memorized every hallway, every air vent, every emergency exit. He had one chance. The old maintenance shaft. Cale sprinted toward the storage room at the end of the hall. He shoved the metal door open, slipped inside, and locked it behind him. The heavy pounding of boots followed seconds later. "Breach it," one of the mercenaries ordered. Cale didn't wait. He ran to the back of the room, pushing aside old crates and dust-covered supplies. Behind them, hidden in the shadows, was a small ventilation shaft. He dropped to his knees, yanked the metal grate open, and scrambled inside just as the storage door exploded behind him. The awakening. Cale crawled through the shaft, his breath coming in sharp gasps. His arms ached, his legs burned, but he forced himself forward. The mercenaries wouldn't stop hunting him. He needed to reach the surface. He turned a corner and... pain. A sudden burning sensation shot through his skull, like a fire spreading through his mind. His vision blurred. His fingers clutched his temples. He gasped, his body shuddering. Then he heard it. A voice. Not his mother's. A deep, ancient whisper, speaking in a language he didn't fully understand. Yet somehow, he knew what it meant. Awaken. Cale's vision cleared. His body felt different. Lighter. Faster. Stronger. His heart pounded, but now it wasn't from fear. It was from something else. A memory, not his own, flashed through his mind. Images of a great battle. A world burning. A people fleeing across the stars. A hidden power buried deep inside their DNA. Inside him, a loud crash jolted him back to reality. The mercenaries had found the shaft. They were cutting through it with plasma tools. No time. Cale clenched his fists. He could feel it now, the energy inside him, the power that had been locked away. His mother had told him he was different, but she had never told him why. Now he understood. He wasn't just a hybrid. He was something more. The escape. The shaft opened into a rocky tunnel. A small metal ladder led up to a rusty old hatch. The emergency exit. Cale climbed, forcing his tired limbs to move. He reached the top and pushed against the hatch. It was jammed. The mercenaries were close. Their voices echoed behind him. Desperation fueled his strength. He pushed again, harder. The metal groaned, bent. Cale froze. That wasn't normal. He pushed once more, this time focusing on the strange energy in his body. The hatch snapped open like it weighed nothing. Cale climbed out into the cold night air. The forest stretched before him, dark and endless. Moonlight filtered through the trees. Wind rushed through the leaves. For a moment, he felt free. Then, a spotlight blinded him. A loud whir filled the air. Cale's heart stopped. A massive black ship hovered above the trees, its engines roaring. They weren't just mercenaries. They had come prepared. The leader's voice crackled through a loudspeaker. "You can run, hybrid." A long pause. "But you can't hide." Cale's fingers tightened around the cube in his pocket. His mother's last gift. He had to keep running. He had to survive. And somehow, he had to find out what he truly was. The awakening power. The night air burned in Cale's lungs as he ran. His boots pounded against the damp forest floor, his breath ragged but controlled. The towering trees cast long shadows, their thick canopies barely allowing moonlight to pierce through. Somewhere behind him, the mercenaries were moving fast. They weren't just tracking him anymore. They were hunting. The black ship hovered in the sky above, its engines humming like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Cale knew they had the advantage. Infrared scanners, motion detectors, advanced weaponry. Against them, he had nothing. Or so he thought. As he weaved through the trees, his fingers curled around the metallic cube in his pocket. It was warm now, almost pulsing, as if reacting to his fear, his desperation. His mother's final words echoed in his mind. "Go to the ruins. Find the gate." The ruins. He had never been there before, but his mother had spoken of them in whispers, always warning him to stay away. If they held the answers to what was happening to him, he had no choice. Then, a sharp whizzing sound. Cale threw himself to the ground just as a plasma shot sizzled past his head, burning through the bark of a tree ahead. He rolled, heart hammering, and sprang back to his feet. The mercenaries had caught up. Shadows moved between the trees. At least 3 of them, closing in fast. Cale turned and sprinted, pushing his aching legs harder. But something was changing. His breathing felt steadier. His legs moved faster than before, his feet barely touching the ground. It was almost like his body was adjusting, adapting. He glanced back. The mercenaries were fast, but now he was faster. Something inside him had awakened, and they had no idea. The first fight. The first mercenary lunged from behind a tree, aiming a rifle at Cale's head. Time slowed. Cale didn't think. His body reacted. His vision sharpened, his muscles tightened, and before the soldier could fire, Cale moved. He sidestepped effortlessly, twisting his body just in time. The plasma shot missed by an inch. Before the man could react, Cale's fist connected with his chest. There was a crack, like metal bending under pressure. The mercenary was launched backward, his body slamming into a tree with a force that shouldn't have been possible. He collapsed, unmoving. Cale froze. Had he done that? He barely had time to process what happened before the second mercenary attacked. A short-bladed energy knife sliced toward him. Cale raised his arm to block, and the blade snapped against his skin. Both he and the mercenary stared in shock. Then Cale struck. A single punch. The man's armor cracked. He was sent flying into the undergrowth. Cale staggered backward, breathing hard. His arms felt different, stronger. The warmth in his chest was growing, spreading through his limbs, sharpening his senses. This wasn't just adrenaline. This was something else. Then the third mercenary fired. Cale didn't dodge. He saw the shot before it was fired. His body moved on its own, twisting just enough that the plasma bolt whizzed past his cheek. He turned toward his attacker. The mercenary hesitated. He had seen what happened to his squad. For the first time, Cale saw fear in his eyes. He didn't wait. He charged. The soldier fired again, But Kale was too fast. He closed the distance in a heartbeat, grabbed the man's weapon, and crushed it in his hands. The mercenary gasped. "What are you?" Kale didn't answer. He didn't know. The soldier turned to run, but Kale grabbed his arm and threw him aside like he weighed nothing. The man crashed into the ground and didn't get up. Silence. Kale stood there, breathing hard, the warmth inside him slowly fading. The fight was over. But he had changed. And now he had proof. He wasn't just faster. He wasn't just stronger. He was something else entirely. A new danger. A deep rumbling noise filled the air. Kale looked up. The black ship was descending. The mercenaries had failed. And now their leader was coming. The trees trembled as the ship's engines roared, shaking the ground. A bright blue energy field spread across the forest, trapping Kale in a shimmering cage of light. A voice echoed from the ship's speakers. "Enough running, hybrid. It's time to come home." Kale clenched his fists. His pulse pounded in his ears. They thought he was trapped. But for the first time in his life, he was ready to fight. The ruins of the lost. The energy field crackled around Kale like a glowing blue prison. The air hummed with power, the force pressing down on him, pinning him in place. His muscles tensed as he tried to move, but the field pushed back, locking him in an invisible cage. Above him, the black ship hovered, its sleek surface reflecting the moonlight. A hatch opened on its underside, and from the darkness, a single figure descended. Commander Voss. Kale had never seen him before, but he knew who he was. His mother had spoken of him in hushed whispers, calling him the hunter, the one who never stopped chasing them across the stars. Voss was tall, clad in dark armor that pulsed with embedded technology. His face was cold, emotionless, a jagged scar running down his left cheek. His eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto Kale like a predator studying its prey. "I must admit," Voss said, his voice smooth yet dangerous, "I expected more of a challenge." Kale clenched his jaw, his fists burning with the power awakening inside him. He had taken down 3 of Voss's men like they were nothing. He had felt his strength growing, yet now he was trapped. Voss stepped closer, placing a hand on the glowing barrier. "You don't even know what you are, do you?" Kale said nothing. Voss smirked. "You think your mother was protecting you, keeping you hidden? No, boy." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "She was keeping you from the truth." Cal's breath caught. His mother had never told him why they were running. She had trained him to survive, but had never explained what made him so special. And now Voss knew. "She never told you about the ruins, did she?" Voss continued, tilting his head. "She was afraid you'd find them, afraid you'd learn what's inside you." Cal's fingers curled into fists. The ruins. His mother's final message had told him to go there. And now so did his enemy. Voss smiled, as if reading his mind. "Oh yes, the ruins hold the answers you seek." His eyes darkened. "And that's why you'll never reach them." Cal's body tensed. His heart pounded. Then, a spark. Something inside him shifted. The warmth that had been building in his chest ignited like a storm, surging through his veins. The energy field around him flickered, reacting to his power. The force that held him weakened. Voss noticed. His smirk vanished. And Kale moved. The escape. Kale didn't think. He acted. He threw his arms out, and the blue energy surrounding him shattered. The force field exploded outward in a pulse of crackling power, sending a shockwave through the forest. Voss stumbled back, shielding his eyes as debris flew around them. Kale didn't hesitate. He turned and ran. The forest blurred around him as his body pushed beyond human limits, his legs carrying him faster than ever before. He could feel the change within him, his instincts sharper, his strength growing with every step. Behind him, Voss shouted into his comms. "Stop him!" The ship roared, its engines blasting as it gave chase. Blue energy bolts rained down, scorching the ground, tearing through trees. Cale dodged left, then right, his body moving before his mind could process the danger. His mother had trained him to survive. Now, his own power was guiding him. Then, through the trees, he saw it. The ruins. The ruins call. Massive ancient stone pillars jutted from the earth, half buried under centuries of time. The air around them felt different, heavy, charged. The symbols on the stone glowed faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the cube in Cal's pocket. This was it, the place his mother had wanted him to find. The truth hidden beneath the world. Cale sprinted toward the ruins, his body aching, his lungs burning, but something inside him pushed him forward. He could feel the energy in the air, pulling him in, calling to him. The ship's engine screamed overhead. Cale reached the first stone pillar just as the ground beneath him shook. A deep rumble echoed through the ruins. Something was activating. Cale's feet skidded across the stone as he came to a stop. His chest heaved as he pulled the cube from his pocket. It was glowing brighter now, reacting to the ruins like a key fitting into a lock. Then, a loud hissing noise. A massive stone door at the center of the ruins began to open. Behind him, Voss and his men burst through the trees, weapons raised. Get the hybrid. Now. Cale didn't look back. He ran straight into the darkness beyond the door. The chamber below. The moment Cale stepped inside, the heavy stone doors slammed shut behind him, sealing him in darkness. Silence. Then, one by one, the walls began to glow. Golden symbols lit up around him, ancient markings older than humanity itself. Cal's breath hitched as he stepped forward, his fingers tracing the engravings. He didn't recognize the language. Yet, somehow, he understood it. A single phrase burned into his mind. "Welcome, last son of Soraya." Cal's eyes widened. This place knew him. The ground trembled. In the center of the chamber, something rose from the stone floor. A platform, carved with the same glowing symbols, pulsing with raw energy. Cale stepped toward it, his heart pounding. He could feel the power waiting inside. This was why his mother had sent him here. This was his legacy. But before he could reach it, a deafening explosion shook the chamber. The doors behind him burst open. Voss stood in the entrance, his face twisted in fury. His men rushed in, weapons ready. Cale turned to face them, his fingers curling into fists. No more running. This time, he would fight. The hunter's leader. The explosion sent a shockwave through the chamber, shaking the ancient ruins. Dust and debris rained down from the cracked ceiling as the massive stone doors crumbled under the force of the blast. Cale barely had time to react. He turned away from the glowing platform, shielding his face as the dust cloud swallowed the room. Then, footsteps. Heavy boots on ancient stone. Through the swirling dust, dark figures emerged, weapons raised. Their armor glowed with embedded technology, their visors reflecting the golden symbols on the walls. At their center stood Commander Voss, his piercing gaze fixed on Cale. The mercenary leader took a slow step forward, the dust settling around him. He was calm, his face unreadable. The scar running down his cheek seemed deeper under the eerie glow of the chamber. "You just don't know when to stop running, do you?" Voss said. Cal's muscles tensed. He had nowhere left to go. The chamber was sealed except for the broken entrance, and Voss and his men were blocking it. Behind him, the platform continued to glow, its energy calling to him. He wasn't trapped. They were. Cale took a step back, his body humming with the strange power inside him. He could feel it, like a second heartbeat, pulsing, waiting. His fingers tingled with raw energy, his senses sharper than ever before. Voss tilted his head slightly, watching him. Then he spoke. "Do you even know what you are?" Cal's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Voss sighed, as if disappointed. He turned slightly, gesturing to the chamber around them. "This place," he said, "is older than anything your human mind can comprehend. Your kind built it. Not humans. Not me. You." Cal's breath caught in his throat. "My kind." Voss took another step forward. "Oh, you really don't know, do you?" He let out a short laugh. "Your mother hid the truth from you. She made you believe you were just a refugee, running from a war you didn't understand." His eyes darkened. "But you're not just a hybrid, Cal. You are the last of an ancient bloodline." Cal's heartbeat pounded in his ears. He wanted to deny it, but deep down, something in him knew it was true. He had felt it the moment he touched the cube, the moment his strength awakened. Voss continued, his voice cold and precise. "Your DNA holds the key to a lost empire, a civilization that once ruled the stars, a power that was feared by every species that dared to challenge it." He raised his hand, pointing directly at Cal. "And you, boy, are the last of them." Cal took a shaky breath, his mind racing. His mother had never told him this. She had trained him, protected him, but she had never told him why. And now, standing in this ancient ruin, he understood. His mother had hidden him from the galaxy. Because if the truth got out, everyone would want him dead. The fight begins. Voss let the words sink in before speaking again. "But you don't have to die," he said. "Come with me. Surrender. Let me take you to those who truly understand what you are." Cal narrowed his eyes. "You mean the people who wiped out my mother's kind?" Voss smirked. "The strong survive. The weak disappear. That is the law of the universe." Cal clenched his fists. "Then I guess you won't survive this." Voss's smile disappeared. "Very well." He lifted his hand, and the mercenaries opened fire. Cal moved. The first plasma shot tore through the air where he had been standing a moment ago. He spun to the side, his enhanced reflexes guiding him, his body moving faster than humanly possible. He closed the distance between him and the first soldier in a heartbeat. One punch. The man's armor cracked as he flew backward, slamming against the stone wall with a sickening crunch. Another soldier swung a rifle toward him. Cal grabbed the weapon and ripped it in half like it was made of paper. Something inside him was fully awake now. His power was no longer flickering. It was alive. The next mercenary lunged at him with a combat blade, aiming for his throat. Cal didn't dodge. He caught the blade with his bare hand. The metal melted in his grip. The mercenary's eyes widened in horror. Cal's voice was calm. "Leave." The man didn't hesitate. He turned and ran. But Voss didn't move. He was watching, studying. And then he smiled. "Good," Voss murmured. "You're finally waking up." Cal didn't wait. He launched himself toward Voss, faster than a bullet, his fist swinging toward the commander's chest. But the moment before impact, Voss caught his punch. Cal's eyes widened in shock. Voss didn't budge. His grip tightened around Cal's fist, like a steel vise. For the first time since the chase began, Cal felt resistance. Voss's eyes gleamed. "You think you're special," he whispered. Then, without warning, Voss struck back. Cal flew across the chamber, slamming into the stone wall. Pain exploded through his ribs, his vision flickering. He had never been hit that hard before. He struggled to stand. Voss was still standing in the same place, completely unarmed. "I've fought your kind before," Voss said, rolling his shoulders. "I've killed them before. You're not the first. You won't be the last." Cal wiped blood from his lip. His muscles ached, but he forced himself up. His mother had trained him for this. She had prepared him for the day when the enemy found him. And now, he wasn't afraid anymore. The ancient symbols around him burned brighter, responding to his rising power. The cube in his pocket pulsed in sync with the ruins, like a key waiting to unlock something greater. Cal's voice was steady. "You don't know what I am," he said. Voss's smirk faded. Cal vanished from sight. And before Voss could react, Cal reappeared behind him. The fight had truly begun. the hidden allies. The chamber trembled as Kale reappeared behind Voss, his body moving faster than human sight. His instincts screamed, "Attack now!" But Voss was already turning, his reflexes impossibly sharp. Their fists collided in midair, sending a shockwave through the ancient ruins. The force cracked the stone beneath them, symbols flickering wildly, as if the battle itself was awakening the ruins' long-dormant power. Kale gritted his teeth. His enhanced strength had overwhelmed every mercenary before, but Voss wasn't like the others. The commander grinned, his grip tightening around Kale's fist. "Not bad," he admitted, "but you're still just a child playing with power you don't understand." Then, without warning, Voss twisted Kale's arm and drove his knee into his ribs. Pain exploded in Kale's side. He staggered back, barely managing to block the next strike as Voss's boot shot toward his face. Kale ducked, spinning low, sweeping a kick at Voss's legs. Miss. Voss sidestepped effortlessly, his movements too precise, too controlled. Kale barely had time to react before Voss struck again, a thunderous punch slamming into his chest, launching him across the chamber. Kale crashed into a pillar, the impact shattering ancient stone. He gasped for air, pain throbbing through his body. His mother had trained him for years, made him faster, stronger, sharper. But this was something else. Voss rolled his shoulders. "Did you really think you were the first?" he asked, stepping forward. "You're powerful, yes, but you're not unique." Kale wiped blood from his mouth, pushing himself up. "You're lying." Voss tilted his head. "Am I?" He spread his arms, motioning to the chamber around them. "Look around you, Kale. This ruin isn't just your past. It's a graveyard. Your kind were once gods among mortals, but they fell. And those who tried to rise again." He smirked. "I put them down myself." Kale's fists clenched. The power inside him burned hotter. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. Voss noticed. He laughed. "Oh, I see it now," he mused. "You're angry. Good. I was hoping you wouldn't break so easily." Kale lunged. Faster than before. This time, Voss didn't dodge. Their bodies collided in a blur of fists and fury. Every punch, every strike sent shockwaves through the air. Kale's movements grew faster, more precise, his instincts sharpening with every second. But Voss was still better. Kale swung. Voss countered. Kale feinted. Voss was already moving. Every move Kale made, Voss was one step ahead. And then, a single punch to Kale's chest. It wasn't just a hit. It was like being struck by a meteor. The force blasted Kale backward, his body skidding across the stone floor. His vision blurred. His breath came in ragged gasps. His strength was failing. Voss walked toward him, slow and steady, unstoppable. "You're strong," he admitted, "but not enough." He raised his weapon, a sleek, energy-infused blade, humming with power. "This is where your story ends." Kale tried to move. His muscles screamed in protest. Too slow. Voss swung the blade down. Then, a gunshot. Voss staggered as a plasma bolt slammed into his shoulder, sending him reeling backward. Kale gasped. From the entrance of the chamber, a squad of heavily armed figures rushed in, weapons blazing. Energy blasts lit up the ruins, forcing Voss's mercenaries to scatter. Kale struggled to sit up, his vision clearing just enough to see. A tall, armored woman with piercing green eyes stepping forward, rifle in hand. She wore battle-worn gear, a rebel insignia on her shoulder. Her voice was sharp, commanding. "Stay down, kid. We've got this." Kale's mind reeled. Who were they? Voss cursed, gripping his injured shoulder as he retreated, his mercenaries regrouping. "You fools," he snarled. "Do you have any idea what you're interfering with?" The woman smirked. "Yeah," she said, saving his life. Then she turned to Kale. "Get up, kid. We've been looking for you." The secret rebellion. The battle was over in minutes. Voss's forces, caught off guard, were forced to retreat. The moment the black ship lifted off into the sky, the rebels turned their attention to Kale. He leaned against the ancient wall, still catching his breath. His ribs ached. His arms felt like lead. But the question burned in his mind. Who are you? The woman knelt beside him, handing him a small medical injector. My name's Captain Rin, she said, and I lead the last free human resistance. Kale's grip tightened. Resistance. Ren nodded. Voss isn't just some bounty hunter. He works for the ones who rule this world, the ones who wiped out your kind and took control of Earth. Kale's stomach twisted. The ones who were hunting my mother. Ren's gaze softened. She died protecting you for a reason, Kale. You are more than just a survivor. You're the key to something bigger. Kale swallowed hard, looking at the cube in his hand. It still pulsed, almost as if it recognized Ren's words. Voss had called him the last of his kind. But Ren was saying something else entirely. Not just a survivor. A leader. Kale took a slow breath. His entire life had been spent running, hiding, trying to survive. Now, for the first time, he had a choice. He looked at Rin. What do you need me to do? She smiled. Come with us. There's something we need to show you. She gestured toward the deepest part of the ruins, where the golden symbols still glowed. Your real story begins here. Kale stood, ignoring the pain in his ribs, and took the first step forward. The war for Earth was far from over. But this time, he wasn't alone. The last stand. The underground chamber stretched before Kale, ancient and alive with a golden glow. The deeper he walked, the stronger the energy pulsed beneath his skin, as if the very walls recognized his presence. Ren and the rebel squad followed closely, their weapons ready. They moved fast, knowing that Voss would return. Kale's heartbeat quickened. He had spent his entire life running. Now, for the first time, he was about to fight back. The chamber opened into a massive underground cavern, revealing something impossible. A ship. But not just any ship. This one was not human, not Voss's. It was his. The vessel, sleek and curved, was buried beneath centuries of rock and dust. Its metallic hull shimmered faintly, its surface engraved with the same golden symbols that lined the ruins. Despite its age, Kale knew it was still alive. Ren let out a low whistle. I was hoping you'd react to this. Kale turned to her. What is this? She smirked. Your mother's ship, the last of its kind. And if we're right, the last weapon that can turn the tide against Voss and the ones controlling Earth. Kale's breath caught. His mother had hidden this. For him. The cube in his pocket pulsed. The ship responded. Then, a deafening explosion shook the cavern. Dust rained from the ceiling as the ancient walls trembled. Kale spun around, his instincts flaring. They were too late. A second blast rocked the entrance. Then came the roar of engines, the heavy thud of boots. Voss had returned. This time, he didn't come alone. The final battle begins. The air shimmered with energy as dozens of black-armored mercenaries poured into the cavern, their weapons glowing. Above them, the black ship hovered, its cannons charging. Kale's hands clenched into fists. Voss stepped forward, his face shadowed by the golden glow of the ruins. He was furious. His eyes locked onto Kale, like a predator about to strike. You should have taken my offer, Voss said coldly. Now you die here. Kale's heart pounded. The rebels beside him raised their weapons, their faces grim. They were outnumbered, outgunned. But Kale was something else. The symbols on the ship flared brighter, reacting to his presence, welcoming him. The truth hit him all at once. This wasn't just a ship. It was a weapon. His mother had hidden it not just to keep it safe, but because only he could activate it. Voss smirked. Kill them. The mercenaries opened fire. Kale moved, awakening the ancient power. The world slowed. Kale saw the plasma bolts before they were even fired. He could feel the movement of every soldier, every bullet, every breath in the cavern. The power inside him erupted. His body blurred, faster than human sight. One moment he was standing in front of Ren. The next, he was gone. He reappeared in the center of the mercenaries, his fists already swinging. The first soldier didn't even have time to scream before Kale's punch shattered his armor, sending him flying across the cavern. Another aimed a rifle at him, too slow. Kale spun, ripping the weapon from the man's hands, snapping it in half. With a single strike, he sent the soldier crashing into two others. The rebels took their chance. Push forward, Ren shouted, firing her rifle. The rebels surged, gunfire lighting up the cavern. Kale was unstoppable. One mercenary lunged at him with a blade. Kale caught it with his bare hand, the metal melting on contact. He kicked the soldier away, twisting just in time to dodge another plasma bolt. His body felt limitless, as if the ship's energy was fueling him. Voss was watching. Not attacking, not moving, just watching. Kale's breath was heavy, his fists still glowing with raw energy. He turned to Voss, narrowing his eyes. "You're not fighting," Kale said. Voss smiled. "Not yet." Then, a piercing alarm echoed through the cavern. The black ship above them shook, its scanners lighting up in warning. Something massive was coming. The true threat arrives. A deep rumble filled the air. Kale felt it before he saw it. A presence, powerful, ancient, familiar. Outside the ruins, the sky turned black. Something descended from the stars. A fleet. But not Voss's. Not human. This was his mother's past coming back for him. The ruins reacted, the golden symbols pulsing wildly. Kale's head throbbed as a voice, not his own, spoke inside his mind. "He has been found." Kale's eyes widened. This wasn't just about Voss anymore. This was about the ones who had destroyed his mother's people, and they had come to finish what they started. The final choice. Voss's smirk widened. Well, he mused. "Looks like we're out of time." Kale's hands shook. The ship behind him was awake, waiting for him. The rebels were his people now, fighting for their survival. And above them, in the sky, a fleet powerful enough to wipe Earth from existence had arrived. He had a choice. Run. Take the ship and escape, just like his mother had planned. Fight. Stay and face the enemy head-on, protecting Earth from what was coming. Kale turned to Ren. "Can you get your people out of here?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, but what about you?" Kale turned toward the ancient ship, placing his hand against the hull. Energy surged through him, recognizing him, welcoming him. He looked up at the sky, at the war waiting to begin. He wasn't running anymore. "I'm going up there," he said. Ren's eyes widened. "You're insane." Kale smirked. "Maybe." Then he stepped onto the ship. The vessel came to life, engines rumbling, golden energy crackling through its structure. Kale took the pilot's seat, instinctively knowing exactly what to do. The ship's controls glowed beneath his fingers. He could feel it sensing with him, its power fusing with his own. Voss, still standing in the distance, laughed. "This," he said, "is going to be interesting." Kale looked up, locking eyes with him. Then, the ship launched, straight into the sky, straight toward the enemy fleet. The final war had begun.